the truth is I was an atheist until I was 30. I was sitting in my living room and I said, God, if you're real, I need you to show me, and I need to know if it's true. And I mean, this, as weird as this is going to sound to someone who hasn't had this experience, I saw a light in the room and I heard a voice say, I love you just the way you are.
This is Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God, those moments when heaven and earth collide. And we see God, we see his hand reaching out to us, attempting to get our attention, inviting us into a closer relationship. So here we share stories of encounter with angels, divine intervention, prophetic dreams, visions, near-death experiences. I am your host, Trapper Jack. This has been one of the most powerful weeks I've experienced in a long time. What a week. What an impactful week here. The title here, this is huge. The fear in you and me that you do not see. Fear wraps itself. It disguises itself. Because we think of fear as spiders. I hate heights. I just cannot handle. I can't get on a ladder. Or maybe it's public speaking or fear of cancer in your life. These kinds of things. That's nothing compared to the fear I'm talking about here. The fear we're talking about here is the kind that it acts like smoke. How do you get it out? The smoke that it crawls into your bones and marrow and muscle and tendons and ligaments and into your mind. And how do you get it out of there? The fear, because the fear is connected to a smoky voice, that voice in you from the enemy, the one that says, you're not enough. You can't do that. What are you doing? What are you thinking, man? How did God allow you to get into this situation? Man, he just does not love you that much. You can't trust him, can you? My gosh. And another thing that voice loves to say to us when we face a hurdle, a hardship is, hey, I didn't sign up for that. I don't have to agree to that. I'm going to be in rebellion. No, I'm not going to accept that. I'll tell you a story about my blindness and how, I didn't sign up for that. And what got me going on this is when I was listening to Father Mike Schmitz talk about this book called He Leadeth Me by Father Walter J. Chizik and his experience in Russia as a priest when suddenly he realized what he got himself into. And I don't have to accept this. I didn't sign up for this.
Father Chizik says the exact things. He said, this life is not what I thought it would be. How many of us have ever said that? It's not fair. I will not serve.
And he went into rebellion from where God wants us all to be, which is accepting everything. Because when we accept everything in our day, that says more to God of how much we trust him with our days, with our life, and how much we love him. Can you get there? If you do, you will find peace.
Acceptance is not the same thing as approval, but it's simply a willingness to walk in truth. Like to acknowledge that this is how things actually are. And I can resent that, I can reject that, I can avoid that, or I can accept it.
And I'll tell you a blindness story in this about how, boy, talk about no, I don't want to have anything to do with blindness. I didn't sign up for this. About 20 years ago or so, a neighbor of mine, right down that direction, his name is Terry, he had a heart attack. And two things happened. One is that he was instantly blinded. The second thing, he ruined his heart. He needed a new heart. He received a heart transplant, and he was completely blind, and just his whole world obviously upside down, right? Okay. But he dazzled me in his acceptance of what just happened. I don't know how long it took him to get there, but he just, okay, here's what I got to do. He accepted his reality. He just went to it. So he went down to our site center here, and he learned Braille, and he learned mobility, how to walk around with that white cane, and he learned, of course, how to cook. And he embraced it all. In fact, I thought he liked it too much, to be honest with you. I'm sitting here going, man, he loves being blind. Whoa, heck, there was someone at the site center who needed to have their kitchen track lighting changed, and he changed it. The blind guy changed it. Where was I at that time? In denial. I went to that same site center, I don't know what time before that, and I went to the site center, and Steve is showing me around the different things they offer me. And there was this one moment, I stood up, and Instead of taking his arm, his elbow, like a good blind person is supposed to do, Mr. Trapper, Mr. In Denial, Mr. Not Accepting, put my hand on his left shoulder and said, "Okay, lead the way." And he looked at me with that look, and he said, "Oh, that's right. You have RP, don't you?" And I went, which means retinitis pigmentosa. And he went, "Oh, yeah, yeah. You know what we call you people behind your back?" And I went, I'm going, "What?" And he says, "Rat pigs." What? Rat? And I'm laughing because I feel like I'm getting a badge of honor here. Why would you call us rat pigs? He says, "Because you're all in denial. You tend to be overachievers, and you're in denial. You do not accept your blindness." And I'm going, "Yep, that's me." And I was proud of it. I got my buddy Terry here. He's just all in, and me, I'm in denial, and I'm thinking I'm the better of the two. Like, what are you doing liking your blindness? Whereas I'm in the more spiritual side that God, take care of this. Miracle, please. I'm waiting. I don't need to learn Braille. I don't need to learn that much about mobility, how to get around. After all, I'm getting a miracle real soon, aren't I? God, you are going to get me out of this, aren't you? And the evil one, that smoky voice telling me, "Yeah, man, don't." And what kind of God would give you this anyway? And you don't have to deal with this and deny this. Instead of saying, "No, God gave me this. God allowed this. Therefore, there is a goodness in it that He is trying to touch and change me with, and maybe even change the world, or at least part of it." And in the book, the priest points out that when he finally did accept where he was, that the day came from God and everything in it, then he found peace.
He said this 24 hours of this day were His will. If I don't actually learn how to recognize God's will in the reality of our situations, I'm going to end up missing on God. Because I can't know. I can't know what I'm saying yes to. But with Jesus, I can know who I'm saying yes to.
And we'll put a link to this wonderful homily in the show notes.
I could say that if there was a God, I hated him. I had lost my mom. I had lost a high school boyfriend I was dating. I had lost my mom 6 months later. And then when I had been a paramedic for less than 6 months, the guy I had been dating for 2 years was killed in a motorcycle accident.
This is Sue Farron back at episode 167, but this time we're going to shine a little different light on it because of the experiences of the week.
But if he had come to me and said, "Listen, I have this plan, but it's going to cost you a husband, a house, and half a kidney," I would never have agreed to this. And that's why he doesn't tell us what's coming.
Who's this Sue Farron? What was her story again?
Well, the truth is I was an atheist until I was 30.
She's had incredible experiences. I mean, literally the voice of God, if you will. Dreams that redirected her in a massive way.
Grew up in a pretty traditional first responder household. Both my parents were alcoholics.
Okay. Where's the God picture in all this?
I was going through a personal crisis, and I was sitting in my living room, and I said, "God, if you're real, I need you to show me. I have screwed up my life, and I need to know if it's true." And I mean, this, as weird as this is going to sound to someone who hasn't had this experience, I saw a light in the room, and I heard a voice say, "I love you just the way you are." So I didn't hear, "I'm God, believe in Jesus, go to church, read a Bible." I heard, "I love you just the way you are," period. He showed up the way I needed him to show up, not the way everyone said he would show up.
Yeah.
And I think that's what worked for me. I wasn't going to believe this with people knocking on my door and telling me to come to church. I wasn't going to believe this because someone quoted a scripture about something that happened 2,500 years ago. I was going to believe it when it showed up in a way that I could understand it and believe it.
Can't put him in a box, can you? You cannot put him in a box.
Nope. And my life has really not been the same since. I mean, I have vacillated from being, finding a church, becoming incredibly conservative, reading the Bible cover to cover, and then going through a really major crisis in the last 5 years, which completely shattered my faith and then redefined it in a way that is irrefutable.
Talk to me. What happened?
I would discover that my firefighting husband was having affairs. We had been married 23 years, had 5 children. I would have sooner believed my pastor was cheating on his wife than my husband was cheating on me. That led us to separate. He had a girlfriend, filed for a divorce. That divorce had shattered my faith. It shattered my faith in God. It had shattered my faith in everything had been shattered when we went through our divorce. And I started urinating blood. And I went to the hospital, and they initially diagnosed me with kidney cancer. He said that it appeared it was in my liver, had probably started in my chest or colon. They expected I had about a year to live. And that, I mean, nothing I will ever say can change that experience for me. I had children who ranged in age from 14 to 20. I was 53 years old. My mom had died when she was 53. She had done everything wrong. She had been an alcoholic, hadn't taken care of herself. I had done everything right. I was a triathlete. I was healthy. Wasn't an abuser of alcohol or substances, and yet I was going to die. And I went through major surgery. They took out half the kidney, the tumor, and in the process paralyzed part of my belly when they cut a nerve bundle going in under my ribs. So what they discovered was that it wasn't in my liver. So I went from being terminal to just having a tumor. And if you're going to have a diagnosis, tumor is what you want, not terminal.
Yeah, I go with that. Yeah, I go with that.
Yeah. And that leads me down this spiral where I am divorced. I have been sort of destroyed financially. I am trying to navigate all of this with 5 kids, 2 who are getting ready to go off to college. I end up critically depressed. I move out of my house into a trailer to try to make ends meet and get in a super bad way. Without being too dramatic, I had a very close call with a suicidal ideation. I got in and got help to try to recover from the trauma and the depression that I was going through. This is the most profound statement that happened in that entire experience. It was 3 days after my surgery. A surgeon came into my room and he said, "We see a lot of this in first responders." And I said, "You see a lot of what?" And he said, "Organ cancer." Well, I knew what we struggled with as first responders. I've been doing it for 30 years. I knew that we struggled with depression and starter wives and adultery and alcoholism and anger and isolation and being numb. I knew all of that, but I'd never heard anything about organ cancer, especially since it wasn't directly related to carcinogens and the conversations we were having around firefighters.
It's just all the stress.
Stress, yep.
Yeah.
And I dove into the research of what was killing first responders. And when I found all this information out, I just prayed and I said, "God, what do I do?" And I had a dream. And in that dream, I was walking through a building with all of these different modalities. There was massage and yoga and meditation and art therapy. And I was like, oh, I thought I was on a college campus. And I remembered in the dream saying, "God, what do you want from me?" And he said, "I'm glad you asked." And he walked me through this building. I had no idea what it was. I sat up when I woke up in the morning and I heard my own mouth say, "That is a resiliency center for first responders." These are the people that the rest of us call when we don't know what to do or things are out of our league. We call 911. And what we need is a place for those people to go and recover from that constant exposure. And the simple statement that people have said, well, they knew what they were getting into when they took the job. No, they didn't. There is no scratch and sniff book for doing this job. You can't see, no one prepares you to see the loss of a child or a family killed in a head-on collision. That you can't be trained for that.
It's got to have an effect, as they often talk about. These are the ones that rush into the building when everyone else is rushing out.
That's right.
That's going to have an impact. That's not just, oh boy, it's John Wayne to the rescue, to take an old hero term. It has to have an impact on somebody. It has to.
Well, it's going to show up somewhere.
Yeah.
You can be the crusty hard guy in the firehouse that everybody imitates. Yeah. This guy's been in the job for 453 years and he's still smoking Marlboros. Well, I promise you there's something going on there that nobody else is seeing. That facade that we put up, we do that because we're cultured to do that. And many of us keep up that, even as a woman, you have to keep up that facade of being strong and together and not being caught off guard or it's an image, and yet on the inside your organs, your tissues, your nervous system, your feelings, your emotions, they're all being impacted. And you may not be aware of what's happening. It doesn't mean it isn't happening. It is happening. And then the next thing I heard was sell your house and make it happen. And I talked to a girlfriend that morning and I said, I had the most bizarre dream. I don't even know if this is accurate. I just felt like God was telling me to build a resiliency center for first responders and to sell my home.
Wow, that is such a that's would you call it a voice? What would you call it?
Yeah, it's hard to describe. It's like an inner knowing. It's so very clear. It's not like I'm hearing a voice outside. It's like I'm hearing a voice inside, but I know the voice is coming from somewhere else. And it's as if you've got an earphone in, right? One earphone, and you hear this sort of voice come through that says, "Sell your home and build a center." And you turn around and you say, "What was that?" But then it was like you can't forget what you just heard.
And you were
So
you were all, I don't know, would you call it all in right away, or just you had to process this for a while?
I
Or
had to process it. I talked to a girlfriend. I said, I have the most overwhelming sensation that I'm supposed to sell my home and build a center for first responders. If you're old enough to remember Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
yes,
okay, so I was building a mashed potato mound in
yeah,
my garage,
baby, yeah,
in my
you
house.
had.
I could hear this, and I when I was doing this research, the crazy thing about it is I had covered my family room wall with butcher paper, and I had written down everything I could find in the research, why our organs are being impacted by the constant exposures to trauma and stress, and how we don't discharge the energy that we absorb on these calls. It stores in our organs. It gives us organ cancer. Then I went into the emotional impacts of what we do, why that affects our relationships, substance abuse, sleep deprivation, and suicide. So I had all of that across my family room wall. I looked like a crazy woman. My kids' baby photos were covered with this huge butcher paper that was stuck to the wall. And that day that I had the dream, I told my girlfriend about what had happened. And she said, it's funny you'd say that. I've got a girlfriend who she and her husband have been looking for a house for 4 years, but they keep getting outbid. Bottom line is that woman came over that afternoon, and 3 weeks later, she made an offer and bought my house. I sold that house. I used that money. I held my first class 3 years ago this month for 40 people. And as of yesterday, we've trained over 5,000. And 2 weeks ago, another miracle, the owner of a piece of property in California, 18 acres, gave me the funding to buy the property to build the resiliency center for the first responders. And I'm sitting in the house on that property looking out in the field right now.
Looky there. Impossible, right?
Impossible.
Resiliency Center. This is a way of what? De-stressing? What are you doing there?
So you go on a really bad fire or a fatal event with a child and you need to get some assistance. You can come straight to us. We will put you through all the self-care modalities that you need to shut off your nervous system, get yourself back into homeostasis, and get their nervous systems back into a state of being calm again, and we'll get out of that chronic state of fight or flight. So we use a lot of different modalities, including art therapy, equine therapy. What we do is we give people their joy back. We show first responders how to enjoy their lives, because if you have a great job and your home life is miserable, you're not happy. If you have a great home life and your job is difficult, you're still happy. And then we're gonna take this mothership, this satellite, and we're gonna build resiliency centers across the nation.
At what point do you go back and go, that voice?
I mean, you can't. It's almost like a near-death experience. You can't just tell everybody, "Hey, everybody, I heard a voice. Hey, everybody, I heard a voice." God is still doing miracles today. He's doing them. He's doing them in the minds of people who He's inspiring. God is speaking. It isn't a matter that He's not talking. It's that we're not listening. And when I say not listening, I mean I believe that the enemy of our souls has a sign in his office that says, "If you can't make them bad, make them busy." And we live in a society that is constantly vying for our time and attention, our telephones, our computers, our TVs. You have to do more, be more, produce more, buy more. And that is the American nightmare, which is just keep them busy so they can't hear the voice of the one who loves them.
Let's pause right about here. Then more with Sue Farron here on Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. Quick Patreon shout out. Thanks, Pam. part of our Patreon family. We love Pam. Talked to Pam a few times. She was actually on one of the earlier episodes. It's so fitting. My wife, Elizabeth, gave me her name as the shout out for this episode, 302, right? She did this weeks ago before I knew what I was doing, and it doesn't matter. And it's so ironic. Here we're talking about, right, acceptance, right, of God's will in our life and all that. And Pam, send a prayer to Pam right now. She's going through a lot. She's going through a lot in her life. In fact, a while back, she sent me a text saying, I really haven't been listening much lately. She says, I have a hard time listening to anything from above, if you will. She says, I'm just going through so much, and it's just pressing down on her so hard. And again, we're talking about accepting, God's will, and it's tough to say, hey, it's God's will. It's a challenge to see God. Where's God's hand in all this pain and suffering? And so someday I hope Pam listens to this and knows that you're praying for her right now to help her through this. So prayers for Pam right now. And thanks again, Pam, for being in our Patreon family. This is a family of listeners, a family of Patreon supporters and all of that. And we're just sending a prayer your way to help you through this. Jesus, touch your heart. God bless you, Pam. Patreon.com, search for Trapper Jack, or come here to this episode, 302, and just click your way through. Okay? All right. Back to Sue now, here on Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God.
And I want to say something that I think this is really true. I think it was Oswald Chambers who said that those who use God uses mightily, he often wounds deeply. And I can tell you that I was a very wounded child. I was a very wounded young woman. I had a lot of trauma in my personal life before becoming a paramedic. I'd lost a boyfriend 6 months before my mom died. I had lost a boyfriend in a car crash. I've grieved in ways I cannot even describe. And I do believe that when people talk about suffering, not everyone goes through that, but I do believe that God will take those wounds and he will use that very tender soil and those tears, and he will make something beautiful out of it. And when we hear the phrase beauty for ashes, we know that for those of us who've been through it, fires have to come. Fires come, and because of those forest fires, especially out here, we have the great sequoia redwoods. The litter on the forest floor is burned, and it changes the pH of the soil. The heat of the fire loosens the seeds in the pine cones. And then those seeds are released because of the heat, and they're dropped into the soil, which has now been transformed by the fire. And because of that, new trees grow. And if it hasn't been for the fire, you don't see that kind of growth. And so I think for many of us who suffer greatly, God is kind in these ways.
Kind of ironic how we were talking about fear and how it can be like smoke. You don't even know it's there, and it's hard to get it out, and how it becomes part of your tissues and all this kind of stuff. And I find out that Sue has done the research to know that indeed trauma does get into our tissues, if you will, and our body remembers.
Well, the heart has its own brain. They research now says that the heart has its own sort of brain cells. And so the heart is very intuitive. And you hear things like people say a gut instinct. Well, you have neurons in your gut too that help you assess things that are going to happen. It doesn't just come from the brain. And this kind of ties back into the research that I did, which is this. And you can look this up. People can read a book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. And what it shows is that memories and experiences are not just stored in your brain. They're stored throughout your tissues, your heart, your lungs, your liver, your skin. They all remember. And so when we're being exposed to things as paramedics and firefighters and police officers, your whole body is living the event, not just your brain, which is why when we retell the stories, we can actually re-traumatize ourselves because your body is reliving the event, dumping adrenaline, trying to react to the experience because your brain doesn't know the difference between the truth and a lie. So if you're telling a story versus you're living an experience, the body is re-experiencing the whole thing. And so when you come down to things like the heart, recognizing people when they talk about being heartbroken, that actually is physical pain in the heart. because the heart has its own source of brain cells. It's a very, and I'm not doing it justice. You're listening to a paramedic try to discuss the research that I've been doing for the last 5 years about,
But I've heard that before, though, that your body doesn't know the difference between what's actually happening and you remembering something, which is astounding, isn't it?
It's astounding. And that's why we'll go through 2 days of training so that we can appropriately respond to somebody else who's been on the job for 20 years, who's had a traumatic event. But the moment they tell us their story, your body firing and your brain firing mirror neurons remembers a call you ran just like it. And so you're both being impacted by the story. And so that's what I think was missing when we were creating these reactive approaches. We were not recognizing we're actually traumatizing both people by having them relive the event. I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't have a time and a place to discuss these calls, to deal with them and talk to a peer, but there also needs to be something in advance of that, showing them what's happening to their bodies and their nervous systems, giving them tools that they need to recognize, holy cow, my body's in fight or flight. How do I shut this off? Because post-traumatic stress is not a disorder. It's an injury. It can be prepared for, prevented, and treated. A disorder is something you have for life that you have to be medicated for and you don't recover from. And it's simply not a disorder.
Let's just break from that for the moment, because I want to talk about your daily conversation with God. Where is he? Where do you meet him? When do you talk to him? All of that stuff. Just give me your day. Give me your day with God.
Okay. Well, here's the address where I meet him.
Okay.
No, I'll tell you what I do now. I've learned to meditate, and prayer is when I talk. Meditation is when I listen. I have spent a lot of time talking to God and very little time listening. And what I've learned to do is get still every single day. Every morning, I get still and I just get out of my way. I tell my brain, we're going to stop thinking. I'm not going out into the future. I'm not going into the past, because God is in the present, right here, right now. And I'm going to be still and know that he is God. Psalm 46:10. I'm going to be still and know that he is God. And I'm going to wait on him. And when I do that, I hear him. Sometimes he speaks. Sometimes he gives me images. And sometimes it's just comfort. Sometimes I'm just sitting there. And I loved this in a book called A Simple Path about Mother Teresa. A man interviewed her and he said, is it true that you pray 7 hours a day? And she said, it is, it's true. And he said, what do you say? And she said, nothing. I just listen. And he said, oh, that's amazing. He says, what does God say? And she said, nothing. He just listens. And I think that's what real love is, unconditional love. And we all know what that's like, to sit in a room with somebody that you love and you don't have to say a word. There's a knowing between you. You know, you're sitting reading the paper, you're drinking a cup of coffee, and there's just a knowing, I love you, I'm here for you.
And the silence doesn't bother you.
And the silence is a gift.
Yeah.
And that's the relationship I have with God.
This is where I have no doubt the Holy Spirit directed me back to 167. So much of our life we don't sign up for. Who signs up for this stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think what we are taught in our culture is suffering is something bad that is meant to be avoided. And instead of receiving it and accepting it, and I've suffered and I've cried and I've sobbed into places that I didn't think were possible. And when I just was able to surrender and say, God, I don't understand. I'm scared. Please don't let me die. Please, please help me. Please save my marriage. Please, God, please. If I could go back and change the way this story played out 8 years ago, I'd still be married today. I wouldn't be on 18 acres in Cotati, California, talking to people about raising money to build a resiliency center for first responders. I wouldn't be here. But when God came to me with this idea, if he'd come to me 8 years ago and said, hey, I'd like you to build a resiliency center for first responders, and I'd like you to teach people about the proactive approach. And oh, by the way, there are a bunch of fires coming, and then a pandemic and civil unrest. So you're really going to need to get moving right away, and let's get going. And I'd have said, let's do it. But if he had come to me and said, listen, I have this plan, but it's going to cost you a husband, a house, and half a kidney, I would never have agreed to this. And that's why he doesn't tell us what's coming.
Amen.
because we'd alter the course.
Amen. How you want to wrap this up, Miss Sue? Parting, those may have been the parting, those are great parting words, but anything else you'd like to say to wrap this up?
I think for those who are on the fence of faith and have suffered and think that there can't be a God, I would say, don't miss the joy. Don't miss the joy. We're all going to get to the other side, whatever that is, and find out that he was here. The whole time you could do it with him or you can do it without him, but you're gonna do it either way.
Thanks, Sue. There's a lot there today. Accepting reality as his will. There's your opener. And it's just so huge. Acceptance is so huge. And again, the enemy of acceptance, which gives you peace, is fear. Who hates it when you embrace acceptance of everything in your life? The fear that looks like smoke. It's the fear in you and me that we don't even see, but it's there. And there is a song called Fear, He is a Liar, by Zach Williams, I do believe. And it says things like, when he told you that you're not good enough, when he told you you're not right, when he told you that you're not strong enough to put up a good fight, when he told you that you're not worthy, when he told you you're not loved, when he told you you're not beautiful, you'll never be enough. Fear, he will take your breath, he'll stop you in your steps, he'll rob your rest, he'll steal your happiness. So cast your fear into the fire. Because fear, he is a liar. Thanks for listening. I need your story. Touchedbyheaven.net. We'd love to have your support and join the Patreon family. Patreon.com or here at episode 302 at touchedbyheaven.net. And I'll see you next week here at Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. I'm Trapper Jack.
If you can't make them bad, make them busy.